Remember that group I talked about that Digibro became a part of called the PCP? The Procrastinators? Actually, they're called the Procrastinators, and their podcast is called the Procrastinators Podcast. That's where PCP comes from. My favorite member of the Procrastinators podcast is a dude who is named Ben Saint. I didn't like him at first because I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just some random dude who just joined the podcast for no reason whatsoever, because every other person on the podcast had a YouTube channel where they made like analysis videos about anime, or they made some kind of video, some kind of something. But then this guy, Ben Saint, just comes along and he doesn't have anything. He just has a Patreon page called patreon.com/Ben Saint. And he'd keep on saying that during the podcast, like patreon.com/Ben Saint. And that's the exact way he would say it. It was a joke that he kept on making. It's kind of funny, actually. But I didn't like him until Digibro, who was that anime review guy that I mentioned earlier in a previous episode of this podcast. Digibro interviewed him, did a 3-hour interview of Ben Saint, and then all of a sudden he became this really, really interesting and cool person, you know. Found out what his life story was, basically. Ben Saint is a guy who went to college very specifically to become a scientist because he thought scientists were cool. So he studied hard, and he was really smart enough to be able to learn all of the necessary stuff to become a scientist. And he became a scientist. And then he realized that being a scientist is the most boring thing you could possibly ever do. And so he quit being a scientist and then became an artist because it's a little less boring than being a scientist. He also traveled all the way like across the world. He went into like Berlin to teach people physics, and he used money to go all across Europe by train and lots of stuff. He's achieved lots of stuff in his life. Very interesting dude. Um, Anyways, and after I heard that interview with him, he became my favorite PCP member because he seemed like the most cultured and most interesting person out of all of them. Anyways, it's not him that I want to talk about. It's actually his girlfriend that I want to talk about. So sometime within the forming of the PCP and later, sometime within there, he met this girl called Jackie, or her name is Jackie. And she was kind of a YouTuber who basically just sang. She had like 5,000 subscribers around. She sang songs from like video games and movies, like songs from Steven Universe, or songs from, I don't know, the Metal Gear Solid 3 or whatever. That's kind of what she did to make her YouTube channel. But anyways, they became boyfriend and girlfriend, and then they made their own special secret channel called Ben and Jackie's College Fund, which was just like a kind of a joke channel where they would post things together. And on that channel, Jackie decided to post over the course of several months, decided to post a very emotionally gripping series of videos describing her slow descent into alcoholism because she became addicted to alcohol as a teenager. She used it as an antidepressant because it was the only way for her to get away from the feelings of depression that she had inside of herself and to not hate herself. It was to drink. And so it's basically a story of her slow but like just constant downward spiral into alcoholism and into the deepest shit. Like she gets into the deepest possible shit that you could possibly imagine, to the point where it's hard to believe that it's even possible for her to get out of this. But she does get out in the end. But it's very difficult to believe because she keeps on going back and forth from getting off of alcohol to getting on alcohol to going to a rehab center to the rehab center treating her like shit. So she gets nothing. So she runs away from the rehab center. There's so much stuff that happens. The series, she titles this series. The series is called the Incarceration Tales, which tells you something. I mean, she has been incarcerated, meaning like put into a psych ward or put into some kind of prison holding place at least 7 or so times in her life, or in this time in her life. She was incarcerated like that many times because she just got into so much trouble with alcoholism. There was like a point where her parents were like put a lock on the outside of her door in her room and just locked her in her room all day and didn't let her interact with her friends, took away her cell phone, took away everything. There was a point where she was trying to kill herself just so she wouldn't have to go to jail or something. Like the police were about to get her, so she tried to like smash her head on the pavement of the street and kill herself that way. There was like a point where, I don't know, there's a point where she's basically prostituting herself out just to be able to get some alcohol. There's a point where and she was desperate for love from people, desperate to feel loved because she never felt loved by anyone. And so, like, even if someone, like, if a guy would say as much as just, like, I love you to her, she would instantly fall in love with him and then would just want to be with him. And he would, like, she just ran into, like, horrible people, like people who would just manipulate her into staying with them by saying that maybe they didn't love her, or maybe they didn't love her if she didn't give them sex. Or it was just like a horrible situation. It got worse and worse and worse. Like you would think that like she would like learn the lesson quick or something, but no, this is like a slow descent into a complete madness where it just gets worse. Just over the course of like 9 videos, and each of these videos are like 40 minutes long. It's kind of like the format of these videos is kind of like this kind of podcast, what I'm doing, where she kind of just speaks her way into a microphone, kind of improvising it. But she has a little bit more production value added to it. She adds her own soundtrack to it, her own music to go with the themes of what's going on, which makes it more interesting. But wow, I mean, there is so much stuff that happens in this series of videos, the Incarceration Tales, and it does seem like it seems like it's impossible for her to get out. It seems like she's just going to keep on doing this over and over again because she does. It's basically like she tries to get out of alcoholism and then she fails and then she decides I need it and then she goes back to alcoholism, or she goes to a rehab center. She got sent to like 3 different rehab centers. One of them was a really, really expensive one that her parents paid for, but she still somehow was able, like she left, or they have a curfew, or they have times when you're allowed to leave, so she would leave and then she would sneak alcohol. It's like there's so much stuff that went on. Like there was a point where her parents actually forced her, like threw her out of the house, and she had to live on her own, and that's when she had to live with all these creepy people who would just like, give her alcohol for favors, or just so uncomfortable, but also very, very interesting and very emotionally gripping. And the way that the story ends, the way that she actually overcomes this is, I don't think she ever gets sent to actual jail. Or like there's a point where she almost gets sent to jail, and then that's the point where she decides that she's going to stop this. But this is something that lasts like 10 years or something, that she's in this mess. But anyways, she gets over it at like, and the way that she gets over it is interesting. Like she decides basically that she's going to do it, and that's how she does it. Like there are so many people, like you'd think that like in movies what happens usually is there's some person who saves them, or some whatever. Like there's this one person who was so nice to me and actually treated me nice, and there were people like that in her story that treated her nice suddenly, and she'd never been treated nice before, and that kind of thing. But those people weren't the people who ultimately saved her. It was herself that ultimately saved her. Like she decided, by narrowly missing that she was going to jail, like she was actually going to try to kill herself because she knew she didn't want to go to jail, and she didn't want to spend like 2 years in prison and actually be a convicted felon. So she had walked through like the woods with a noose, looking for a branch that was sturdy enough to tie it to, and she just couldn't do it. She was too much of a coward to kill herself. And then she found out that she actually wasn't going to go to jail, and that she had a second chance, and then, or a third chance, or a fourth chance, or seventh chance. She had so many chances that she blew, and so many times that like people just stopped trusting her. But she somehow got out of it, and I guess that's what's the amazing thing about the story. But she got out of it once again, like I said, by choosing to do it herself. She saved herself. She made the decision to get better, and I think ultimately that is kind of the truth about getting out of this kind of thing. You have to make the decision to get your life better. Like, people can maybe point you in the right direction and give you steps, but you have to take those steps, and if you're not ultimately going to decide to take those steps, it's never going to happen. But anyways, very interesting series. I will link to the first episode in the description of this video if you want to watch this series. But yeah, that's all I have to say about this. This is the end of the Kokino podcast for this time, folks. See you guys next time.